In June 1967, Israel launched one of the most devastating preemptive strikes in military history. In 6 days, it destroyed 3 Arab armies, captured the Sinai, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and Jerusalem. Egypt, Jordan, and Syria combined outnumbered Israel in almost every category: tanks, jets, soldiers, artillery. None of it mattered. This is every weapon used in those 6 days. We start with the tanks. First, Israel. Centurion shot. Israel took the British Centurion and made it better. New 105mm gun, upgraded engine, and better fire control. Israeli crews called it the Shot, and it became the backbone of their armor in 1967. In the Sinai Desert, Israeli Centurions destroyed Egyptian tank formations that outnumbered them 3-1. Better training and better optics beat bigger numbers every single time. M48 Patton. America supplied Israel with M48 Pattons before the war. Israeli engineers immediately upgraded the engine and replaced the original gun with a 105mm cannon. In the battle for Jerusalem, Israeli Pattons fought Jordanian armor through narrow city streets where the fighting was close enough that crews could hear each other shouting. AMX-13, French light tank Israel used for reconnaissance and fast flanking moves. Too light to fight T-54s head-on, but fast enough to get around them. Israeli AMX-13 crews used speed and surprise to hit Arab armor from angles the enemy never expected. Now, Arab tanks. T-54 and T-55. Egypt and Syria fielded hundreds of Soviet T-54 and T-55 tanks. 100mm gun, thick armor, and available in numbers Israel could not match. But Israeli aircraft destroyed hundreds still sitting in their revetments on the first morning. The ones that survived found Israeli Centurions waiting with better optics and better trained crews. M47 and M48 Patton. Jordan fielded American Patton tanks just like Israel. In the West Bank, fighting Jordanian and Israeli Patton crews fought each other in one of the strangest armored battles of the Cold War era. Same tank, same gun, completely different outcomes. Israeli crews won because they coordinated with aircraft and infantry in ways Jordanian doctrine had not prepared for. T-34. Syria still had World War II era T-34 tanks in service in 1967, completely outclassed by everything Israel had. On the Golan Heights, Syrian T-34 crews fought with extraordinary courage against Israeli armor that was 20 years more advanced. Courage could not close that gap. That takes us to infantry fighting vehicles. First, Israel. M3 half-track. Israel used American World War II era M3 half-tracks to move infantry across the Sinai and into the West Bank. Old, but reliable and available in large numbers. Israeli half-track crews drove through Egyptian defensive lines so fast that Egyptian commanders thought they were being attacked by a much larger force than was actually there. Now, Arab infantry vehicles. BTR-152. Soviet-wheeled armored personnel carrier, Egypt and Syria, used to move infantry. 8 wheels, open top, and enough armor to stop small arms fire. Egyptian BTR-152s that survived the airstrikes on the first day found Israeli paratroopers and armor blocking every road out of the Sinai. Most were abandoned when their crews ran out of fuel and options simultaneously. Moving on to artillery. First, Israel. M50 155mm. Israeli self-propelled artillery based on the Sherman tank chassis with a French 155mm gun on top. Fast enough to keep up with advancing armor and powerful enough to destroy any Arab defensive position. Israeli artillery crews moved forward so aggressively that they were sometimes firing at targets visible to the naked eye. L-33 Roam. Another Israeli self-propelled howitzer built on a Sherman chassis with a 155mm gun. Israeli artillery doctrine in 1967 was aggressive and fast. Artillery was supposed to move with the tanks, not sit behind them. The L-33 crews proved that philosophy worked by staying in range of Israeli armor throughout the entire six-day campaign. Now, Arab artillery, D-30. Soviet 122mm towed howitzer Egypt and Syria used in large numbers. Accurate and reliable, but completely vulnerable once Israeli air superiority was established on the first morning. Israeli jets hunted Arab artillery batteries specifically. D-30 crews that tried to fire gave away their position and died for it. BS-3, Soviet 100mm anti-tank gun Egypt, positioned along the Sinai defensive lines to stop Israeli armor, powerful enough to penetrate Israeli Centurions at combat ranges. But Israeli combined arms tactics of tanks, infantry, and aircraft attacking simultaneously overwhelmed Egyptian gun crews before they could bring the BS-3s to bear effectively. Next up, the jets. First, Israel. Dassault Mirage 3 CJ, the aircraft that won the Six-Day War before the ground fighting even started. On the morning of June 5th, Israeli Mirage pilots destroyed the Egyptian Air Force on the ground in less than 3 hours, flying low to avoid radar, hitting every Egyptian airbase simultaneously, and destroying over 300 aircraft before most Egyptian pilots reached their jets. The most successful airstrike in history, Super Mystere, French-built Israeli strike aircraft that hit Egyptian, Jordanian, and Syrian air bases on the first morning alongside the Mirages, faster than most Arab interceptors, and armed with bombs and rockets that turned Arab aircraft into burning wreckage on the runway. Super Mystere pilots flew multiple sorties on the first day, landing, rearming, and taking off again within minutes. Dassault Ouragan, older French jet Israel still had in service in 1967, used for ground attack missions against Arab armor and infantry positions after the air war was won on the first morning. Slow by 1967 standards, but accurate enough and available in numbers that mattered when Israel needed every jet it had to support 3 simultaneous ground campaigns. Fouga Magister, Israeli jet trainer turned light attack aircraft, slow, lightly armed, and completely unsuited for combat against real fighters. Israeli Fouga pilots flew against Jordanian armor and infantry positions anyway. Several were shot down. The ones that survived kept flying. A training aircraft that went to war and did its job. Now, Arab jets, MiG-21, Soviet supersonic fighter Egypt and Syria fielded in large numbers. Fast, capable, and completely irrelevant because most were destroyed on the ground before their pilots could reach them. The Egyptian MiG-21s that did get airborne found Israeli Mirage pilots who had trained for exactly this fight. Israel won almost every engagement. MiG-17, older Soviet fighter, still capable in close combat at low altitude. Egyptian and Syrian MiG-17 pilots who survived the first morning flew with genuine skill against Israeli jets. But outnumbered, out-coordinated, and operating from destroyed air bases, even skilled pilots could not change the outcome. Tu-16 Badger, Soviet strategic bomber Egypt used to threaten Israeli cities. Israel destroyed every Tu-16 on the ground on the first morning before a single one could take off. The aircraft that was supposed to be Egypt's most powerful offensive weapon never fired a shot in the entire war. That brings us to air defense. First, Israel, Hawk missile. American surface-to-air missile system. Israel deployed to protect its cities and air bases. The Arab air forces were so completely destroyed on the first morning that Israeli Hawk batteries had almost nothing to shoot at for the rest of the war. The best air defense is destroying the enemy air force before it takes off. Israel did exactly that. Now, Arab air defense, SA-2 guideline, Soviet long-range surface-to-air missile Egypt and Syria deployed around their air bases and cities. On paper, one of the most dangerous air defense systems in the world. Israeli pilots flew below its minimum engagement altitude on the first morning strike and destroyed the air bases the missiles were supposed to protect. A system that could not defend the one thing it was positioned to defend. ZSU-57-2. Soviet self-propelled anti-aircraft gun with twin 57mm cannons. Egypt and Syria used to protect ground forces from low-flying Israeli jets. Brought down several Israeli aircraft during the Sinai and Golan fighting. Israeli pilots learned quickly to avoid predictable attack runs over Arab armored columns that still had ZSU-57s operational. Now the Navy. First, Israel. INS Eilat. Israeli destroyer that operated in the Red Sea and Mediterranean during the war, keeping Arab supply routes under pressure. After the war ended in October 1967, Egyptian missile boats fired Styx missiles and sank the Eilat, making it the first warship ever sunk by a guided missile in combat. A footnote to the Six-Day War that changed naval warfare forever. Now Arab Navy. Komar class missile boat Soviet built missile boat Egypt used in the Mediterranean. Small, fast, and armed with Styx anti-ship missiles that had longer range than any gun Israel had at sea. The threat of Egyptian missile boats kept Israeli surface ships cautious throughout the war. And after the war ended, one of these small boats sank an Israeli destroyer and rewrote the rules of naval combat permanently. And finally, small arms. First, Israel. Uzi Israeli-designed submachine gun that became one of the most recognizable weapons in the world. Israeli paratroopers carried Uzis into the fighting for Jerusalem and the Sinai. Compact enough to use in vehicles and buildings, reliable enough to keep firing in desert sand and dust. The weapon that became a symbol of Israeli military capability around the world. FNFAL. Belgian-designed semi-automatic rifle Israel used as its standard infantry weapon in 1967. Accurate, powerful, and familiar to Israeli soldiers who had trained on it for years. In the infantry, fighting that followed the tank battles, Israeli FAL armed soldiers cleared Egyptian and Jordanian positions with speed and aggression that matched their armored counterparts. Now, Arab small arms. A K-47 Soviet assault rifle Egypt and Syria issued to their infantry. Reliable, simple, and effective in the desert conditions of the Sinai and Golan. Egyptian and Jordanian soldiers fought hard with AK-47s in defensive positions that Israeli infantry had to clear building by building and trench by trench. The gun itself was never the problem. Everything around it was. SKS Soviet semi-automatic carbine some Arab units carried alongside the AK-47. Older than the AK, but still accurate and reliable. Egyptian infantry in the Sinai defensive lines used SKS carbines in prepared positions that should have been difficult to take. Israeli combined arms attacks bypassed the strongest positions and hit the weakest ones. The SKS armed soldiers defending empty ground while the real battle happened somewhere else.